worked in really highly regulated industries, banking and insurance. So I imagine that there are some very specificities to the priorities. How do you think, with all of the stuff that's on your plate, about your particular set of priorities?
Look, I mean, I think there are table stakes first. There are invisible things that you need to have under control, because otherwise you don't get the right to sit at a table, at the strategic table, and provide any contribution. And table stakes are, I would say, trivial or menial, but are things like system stability. If your systems keep crashing, no one will listen to your fantastic vision and technology strategy, and God knows. If you can't ensure data integrity, and this is the things that keeps CIOs up at night, you have an issue. System performance has to be, up to par. Customer satisfaction, user satisfaction. Your project delivery has to fit. And I would say project delivery more the promises versus what you're delivering. If you don't get the reputation, you don't get the credibility, you are not at the table. Cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is not trivial, because it does not just mean you don't have to be breached. It does mean also that your security has to be invisible enough not to be a pain in the neck. Right? So how do you ensure that? And how do you manage operational risk? Because things can float nicely for a while, but they naturally tend to go belly up. How do you manage this? So, and these are table stakes. These are not fancy. No one really cares, in marketing terms about those things. But if you don't manage that, everything else, you don't have the right to contribute. Then, once table stakes are done, you can enter into the strategic contribution as such. And here as a CIO, I would say you have 2 to 3 areas of contribution or priorities. The first one is the how you do IT, which is not something the business is very interested into, right? So how do I, develop software? How do I architect that? How do I manage architecture? What is my own, call it IT for IT strategy? What is my cloud strategy, which is not a sourcing strategy, is way beyond. How do I train my people? How do I grow them in a new role? How do I migrate into a proper Devops stack? What is my tooling? I mean, all of this is the business of doing IT, right? And there you need to have a strategy. You need to transform. Cloud is bringing a number of paradigms that are asking the software development life cycle, if you can call it like this, to massively evolve. That's a strategic transformation that the CIO has to master. But that's only the how. Then you enter, of course, the what. What do you do with IT? Given the capabilities you have built with the first one, what is the purpose of IT? What do you want to reach? And here it starts getting, I would say, out on the boundaries or outside the boundaries of the IT family, because that's the area of business IT alignment. What is your operating model? Do you have CIOs, or do you just have dev heads? Are you embedded into the exco of your businesses? How do you engage? How do you show transparency? What level of transparency do you want to provide? How much transparency does your business need or want? Right? And transparency is a tricky beast, because it's a lever, it's a builder, or is a destruction lever for credibility. Right? So if you're meant not to be transparent, you're going to go south very quickly. How do you manage strategic conversations with business? Where do they want to go? In number terms, of course, but also in business terms, and how can you make it happen? So that's a business IT alignment challenge of the what. Of course, there is a big how, which is around innovation. And innovation is a tricky beast, right? Because innovation is not a toy game. I can assure you, in all the places I've been so far, I had all the toys I could dream of. And still, it's a question whether this was innovative or not. I mean, if I can buy a Ferrari, but I will not become a Formula One driver just because I have a Ferrari in the garage, right? So that's the same story with technology. Innovation is not buying toys. Innovation is rethinking your business in a world which is made, out of technology, and then you build it on technology. So innovation is something that is way broader. Hence my comment before. Business is a massive element of digital transformation, because the way you design your products is where innovation starts, right? The impact of UX and CX, customer experience, customer design, all of this is the element of the innovation that you need to lead. Then, of course, one of the strategic contributions as a CIO you need to have is, and this links to the audience and to the meaning of this event, you need to know the context. As a CIO, you need to know what the competitors are doing. You need to know what is happening in the market, who are the marketing players, who are the marketeers, what is the marketing storytelling, which is outright, I'd say, on on the boundaries of lying, if you want to exaggerate a bit. You need to read what is fed to you in information terms. Context-wise, you need to have a peer network. I mean, the experience I made with Inside Partners was fantastic, to create a network of peers, of talents, because that's what helps you in whatever role navigate what is happening around. Because if you don't know what is around, you become your own self-reference model, and then you just sink very, very quickly. You need to know technology. You need to know what is coming, coming up in the next 5 to 10 years. Because otherwise, again, I mean, IT has a very long cycle. If you don't see what is emerging and what kind could happen in the next years, your decisions will always be behind, because the time you've implemented, you've been basically killed by what is happening. So that's the second big pillar, right? So deliver strategic contribution. Then there is a third element, which is the one of creating or enabling or ensuring that the underlying contributions can happen. One is, one of the huge animals is the one of skills. Right? Because if you are just at the front of technology with junior graduates from the top technology schools, skills are not an issue. If you are a company that has 200 years of history, 150 years of history, and your people have an average age of 51, you might have a challenge with skills, right? And how do you create that engine to upskill, reskill your people, or to attract talent, to keep talent? So that people engine is a brutal element. There's a hidden element is around the leadership style. The pyramidal, patriarchal, I'm the boss and I'm the genius and I know everything and I'll tell you what to do leadership model is no longer suitable to the type of engagement we face and talent we need also to empower and to help deliver the best performance possible. So that's also something that a CIO needs to influence and to change on. What type of leadership style is the most conducive to unleashing the performance I have in the organization? And then the last point, which is my favorite, is the one, how do I keep my levers of action free? My degrees of freedom, if you want to call them like this. How do I manage my technical debt? How do I manage obsolescence? Because I'm sitting, there's this word that says when something goes into production, so get released, it instantly becomes legacy. And as a CIO, I'm sitting on all the good ideas of the last 20 years because they are there, they're in production, I need to operate them. How do I manage this obsolescence? How do I manage this debt in a way that is not strangling me in resource terms? Then how do I manage the resource allocation? Because you might have, you talk with a CIO of a large organization, they have a $1 billion change budget with so much money, it will be an easy sell. Truth is, the degree of allocation, degree of competition between projects, ideas, technologies is just huge. Right? So how do you create the mechanism to allocate resources in the most in the easiest way possible? And the last one, which is the unsolved problem of the CIOs, is how do I manage complexity in a structured way? Because we are sitting, we are not greenfield, we are not stage zero something where there is no history. We are sitting on an amount of complexity which is just outrageous, and that's a challenge to manage. There are also some misconceptions on what a CIO is or is not. So the CIO is not the head of the projects of an organization, right? Of course, there are projects, but projects are only a subset of the problems that the CIO has on the table. The CIO is not the head of development, right? There is a development squad, there is a team that does development. They do have own priorities, interests, curiosities, drives, and it's not the CIO. The CIO is not the innovator. The CIO is the one that makes innovation happen, creating the preconditions, but it's not the one that will get excited by an idea and that will, make a bank to Facebook or Meta or whatever else. And the CIO is not the one that decides. I know it sounds crazy. So I finally got a meeting with the CIO, and you feel, if the meeting goes well, it's a trade, right? So we can sign a contract. You can forget about that. Right? You can imagine the CIO that meets you wants to understand what is, what's in for him. What problems, which one of my problems are you going to solve, right? And then I might see who else in the organization can build on your product to solve my problems. So that transactional model, you meet a very senior manager, you get a decision, in large organization usually does not work. And if it works, and you need to be careful about this, If it works, the problem is just beyond the corner, because then the adoption and the utilization of your trade, will be cumbersome, because everyone will look at that and say, that's a decision by the boss, but it doesn't really work, but we have to do because he decided, and they will find a way and it will sync, right? So, that's what I believe is a CIO. And I think it is important for you to know, because you have to navigate, that personality and that situation.
It's fascinating you say. I mean, the pile on the CIO's plate gets ever larger, and I think you talk about how actually you can't be the decision maker, because to your point previously, that can stifle innovation. If everything funnels through you, and it's as much about embedding the culture in that decision making process, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. You mentioned a word that really jumped out to me, which is managing complexity, and that has many different forms, and we've talked about this in the past. Thinking about not only the technical debt, but the resource allocation, but also the multifarious both endpoint and platform solutions that are provided your way. Could you explain a little bit about what that means for you, complexity and managing it, and what contribution Insight's portfolio and the folk on this call can contribute to helping you manage it?
Well, complexity has a number of dimensions. In the place I've been before, one is, of course, the sheer size, right? At UniCredit, IT is about 10,000 people, right? It's 10,000 humans with a brain, with a belief, with an intention, and that needs to be orchestrated into something coherent. Behind that, we were running, 1,500 to 1,600 projects a year, right? And all of these, has to be planned into releases, go production, get tested. When something, incidents happen, you need to fix it. So that's a level of complexity, which is, so to say, just size driven. Then there is a complexity on the time axis, given one element by the historical layering. In any organization, in any large organization, you will have systems running that have been designed 10, 15, 20 years ago. They fulfill the mission, they are there, but they happen to have been designed under different paradigms, with different technologies, with different integration architectures. And this creates sort of rigidities and boundary conditions you have to respect. So that's an element of complexity. Another element is the usual trade between, I go very fast and I'll fix later, and I'll do compromises, or I'll go slower, but I think to all of the eventualities. Right? And there is no easy solutions, right? So for some cases you need to go fast, for others you better think. And if you go too fast, too frequently, you end up creating layers and layers of things that are half-baked. They function more or less, with glue and speed, but it's there and it's looking at you. And when you touch it in one way or the other, it threatens you to collapse anytime. I'm exaggerating a bit, but the sense is, this layering of sprint and sprint and sprint and sprint, where architecture might or might not be properly managed, where plenty of external firms are intervening. And once you have, name your favorite one, they design it on their principle, and then somebody else, this creates an incredible, it's a Star Wars, it's the bar of Star Wars, right? So you get variety, right? That is, paralyzing a number of processes that usually look trivial, and creates also a vicious circle. Because it's complicated and complex, organizations tend to build controls to ensure that this does not get dangerous. And controls, bureaucracy. Control, paralyze. Control, create even more complexity. So you want to release something, you probably have 20 people looking at the something before it gets granted rights to get into production, because it's dangerous, right? So, and that creates a huge vicious circle. Make an example. We had a tool to check embargo lists. Basically, if you go do a payment, to check that that nothing is against embargo decisions. That system had 900 interfaces, 900, right? And the single interface might be easy, but the number is just crazy. So that historical layering is one element. Then when you go into the technical complexity, you might have the challenge of knowledge, right? Do you know where are all of your systems, right? And it sounds trivial, but when you get to the 5-digit level of machines or applications or whatever, it starts getting tricky to know exactly what is connected to what and what is where, especially if you consider this has been growing organically. Sometimes, you buy a different company and suddenly you have a next bank with their IT inside your data center. It's a different animal, right? And that creates the challenge of visibility. I mean, I've seen somebody on the list that I've been working with. So, Jakub, the problem. It took me a year to learn that we had two Splunk, instances for logging. Because when I asked, do we have logging? Yes. What do we have? Splunk? Fantastic. Except it was two. Right? So, and you discover, and that's complexity. So that's a challenge of visibility. Then there is, of course, the human complexity. When you put humans together, it can go very well, but it can get very, very human, right? So you have to align teams. You have other stakeholders. You have peers. You have CDOs. You have, compliance officers. You have risk officers. That is human complexity because everyone has a mission. You expect it together to achieve the grand target of the organization. But this is noise. Sometimes it's Brownian motion. So it's really very, very intense. And on all of this, as if this wouldn't be enough, there are networks of influence. Right? There are very large tech players, or there are very large investors, or there are small tech players that influence your internal business counterparts, your own people in the team, and they tell you, go cloud, you save 90% of your cost of infrastructure, right? And everybody's there and say, CIO, do it because there is savings. I've read it on Cosmopolitan for the CIO, right? So these networks of influence are also an element of complexity that I need to manage. Now, why is all of this a problem, and why is that relevant for you? I made the joke before. The CIO is the chief scapegoat officer. The challenge is that everyone around you knows better or pretends to know better than you, right? And it's very hard, given this underlying complexity, to have success. Right? Because if the expectation is in 6 months, a billion size IT is transformed, it is unrealistic, right? So I cannot build New York in 2 years. It doesn't work. You cannot go against gravity, but that's expectation. So, you will meet CIOs that have a very hard time showing what is success. And, I will allow myself to be a bit direct, but they will not be waiting for you. They will not be waiting for you. When I was meeting vendors, right, it was most of the time, a sort of, I wouldn't say annoying meeting, but mostly a meeting I was entering in a very, very skeptical way because they were mostly coming to me with a transaction idea, right? I give you this, you give me money, and I've made my targets, and you have this, and then hopefully you do something with this, right? So the only thing I saw was, I get more complexity and less money and more problems, right? So, and to me, that's the key element of how you position yourself towards your CIOs in front of you. They have a hard time demonstrating success. They are sitting on a freaky zoo, and you're asking them to bring another animal in the zoo and get some money for that. It will be hard, right? It will be very hard. You need to find a story for them that is solving their problems. And of course, they will honor it. That's not the subject. But you need to solve their problems and not claim to solve them, really solve them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the adding an additional solution into what is already a crowded, noisy space is not going to get you fast friends in the CIO's office. But being able to provide, and I presume also show that you understand that that's the situation they're sitting on, would make a big difference.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I want to just switch gears. You mentioned when you were talking about the priorities, the fact that the chief scapegoat officer, as you described it, sits at the heart of a pretty tricky set of stakeholders in the organization. Not only obviously the board up above, but also peers across the organization in the business lines. A lot of the portfolio companies on the line have to align those stakeholders, but specifically between the business line and the IT org. What would you recommend to those that need to navigate through that complexity?
Yeah, I mean, the first feedback is a very personal one. If you go business first, you do a proof of technology, you are very happy, and only then you appear on the radar of the CIO, it will not be a pleasant situation, right? So the cases I had like this were the ones that, I was not particularly appreciative of, right? And I'm very polite in the formulation, right? So yes, many stakeholders, everybody wants to have success. but everybody has a different perspective and tune on the challenges they're looking at. And of course, the portfolio companies that I've been meeting so far have a size that makes it complicated to tune messages to 6 or 7 different stakeholders in the organization. And still, that's a price of entering large organizations, right? So you don't have a single decision maker that decides, yes, I want, and then ensures it's happening, right? At large organizations, you will have a chief data protection officer, a procurement officer, a category purchasing officer, an infra manager, and they will all have a say because they own a part of the complexity and because they are experts in their area. And you will have to have different messages for all of them. So that's one element. The good side is that because they all want to succeed, you can be the ones that catalyze the interfaces between them. So if you go talk with business and you get a lead to the chief exec of the division payments in Elbonia, fantastic. Ask them to bring the IT guy at the table. They will not bite you, right? But at least you will ensure that nothing happens bad afterwards because they discover that you were talking together. Of course, there is a risk because the IT guy might then tell you, it's a cool technology. We already have 3 different tools that do the same, right? So you have to be ready on what is your competition market. So who are your direct competitors? And don't tell me that they're unknown, right? Because usually there are companies that pretend to be in the same, at least pretend, if not, are really in your space. So you need to know who they are because you can expect that in large organizations, somebody will know them and they will confront them with you. Or even later, you might enter into an RFP phase and they will formally check you against the others. So you need to know exactly who are your competitors and how you are different from them, where you are better. Ideally, you should even share where you are not so good like they are, because that's what makes the magic. So, ensure that you create those links. Then I would also recommend not to stick to the senior management. Of course, it's not bad and it makes sense and everything, but find also inside the organization 1-2 levels below the silverbacks, the ones that are authorities in their subject area, that are credible, that are professional, and that deliver. If you convince them, the CIOs will have a much lower hurdle to adopt your solution because they know it's going to happen afterwards, because their experts believe in that, right? If an expert of mine tells me I want to have blue, the probability of blue happening is bigger than if I tell them use blue. See, so there is this groove that you need to create around your product inside the organization. As you can imagine, it's not a technology play. We have all the tools of the universe and more, and we're not using them frequently, and they are overlapping. So if you just come in with a toy story, fine, it's not going to do big magic. And then you need also to have a story for your counterparts. Are you a new toy or are you substituting an existing toy? Because if you are substituting, I will start listening because it's reducing complexities, efficiencies, low cost, there's plenty of other things. But at the same time, how big is the challenge of taking out the old stuff and bringing in yours? What is it's not just let's adopt something. So it's migrate things. So consider also the migration effort if you are substituting. If you're adding a tool, you better have a very good reason to add another tool, right? So what do I get? Do I get, better software development efficiency? Do I get better quality in production? Do I get lower risk? What do I get that I can value in a way or the other? Then, my recommendation is don't go too hard with logos of references and with Gartner. When Gartner and Gartner quadrants, I keep saying, is the instrument that people that don't know technology use when they want to judge technology. So if you start with this one, you qualify yourself a little bit in the marketing space, right? Instead of coming with hard facts on why you are better than the others. You have to be very transparent on your revenue model. And I understand that the world today is going to recurring revenues and subscription models and pay-per-use and all of that. That's very cool from the perspective of the ones that get paid. From my perspective, this is money that flows out. And I need to understand if this is predictable. I will never buy anything where I don't know where do I land with my expense. It has something that has to fit into my budgets. So if it's not predictable or if it's oversized, I don't know where to put it. So I like the technology, but I cannot buy. And it has to correlate with your contribution. There was a big software company years ago that tried to make the license model proportional to the revenue of their customer. Right? So imagine I sell more cards, insurance policies, whatever, and you make more money. What is your contribution exactly to me making more revenue? So I need to see the contribution you are delivering. And then, of course, I'm honoring your cost of investment in software, of maintaining, of operating, of everything, but not more. Right? So that is an element that that plays a role. And then, of course, cost versus value. I need to see tangible value, monetary value. And monetary is tricky because, the cash out going out is very, very linear. I see it. The savings, sometimes. The soft value, very difficult. Right? So here you need to be very practical and very clear. Then you have to think to the non-tech part of the story. Your technology is brilliant. I've seen, all the companies I've met so far with Insight partners have been, outstanding products with fascinating technologies and fantastic talents. But you need to think what else? You need to be ready for procurement. Procurement has a completely different view on the world. They want to see, where are you certified with what? They want to see how big you are. They want to see, your P&L. They want to see things you wouldn't think that anybody else is interested. They want to see it. You need to be ready for operational risk reflections. If you provide a service and you are a 50-person company, I want to know what happens if I have an incident at 3 o'clock in the morning. Do you have engineers that can, jump out of the bed and help me? Do you have enough of them? Do you have them, on site where I live? Right. So think operational security. What is your impact on my system stability? I met an interesting company with, a next generation database. Fantastic. And then I told them, look, why should I move away from Oracle, where I know what type of support I get if anything bad happens, and come to your company with 50 engineers? What is the underlying reason? Because my risk is that I break the bank because I found an interesting tool. That risk I can't carry, right? So that story is an interesting one. You need to show me how many good engineers you have on the ground, so the boots on the ground, if you want. You need to train my people because I need to use your technology. You need to be ready for cybersecurity. I was in the interesting observation. Some of you could be a cybersecurity risk for me because you could be object of supply chain attacks. Are you aware of this? Are you taking care of this in any way? Are you assuring me that what I'm bringing to my data center, what I'm consuming as a SaaS is protected in a way that nothing bad happens on my end? How can you assure my security crew that you are ready in this place? And the last message is, don't try to shortcut. Right? Of course, you can go to the chief exec and they will tell you, fiat. Sooner or later it bites you back because the CIO might only be interested in you for a week or so, and then they forget you. But we need to implement, and then even if it's implemented, it has to run. So don't shortcut in that space. So again, it's a bit long, and I know we are heading towards the end of the time, but it's to give you a sense of the challenges that we have when you are inside the large organization, because that drives sometimes this rubber wall that you're walking in, when you're meeting large organizations.
Super valuable, and I think incredibly actionable for the people who are on the call. I think a couple of things I took away. When you're dealing with that complexity, that matrix decision-making structure, don't be afraid to be the catalyst or the conduit for the information. Don't assume that there's a perfect marketplace of information on the other side. I thought and I think that, when you think about organizations approaching large ones, there's a certain kind of, nervousness or fear that actually, well, look, there's plenty of conversations going on behind the scenes. Why would I contribute further? But it seems that that's actually not always the case. Yeah. And then the other side, I think, leveling up the conversation to talk about the challenges that you're facing, whether it's complexity or risk or technical debt, whatever it may be, level up to the problems that are on your list.
Sorry, it cut the last 3 words. Can you repeat it?
Leveling up so that they're talking about the problems that sit on your to-do list versus the bits and bytes, the features, functions that are in the pitch. Yeah, absolutely. Want to think about your decision-making process and how you think about making tech decisions, and specifically, I'd love to know, how do you empower your team to think about their decision-making process? You can't write all the checks, you can't rubber stamp all the deals. So how do you think about empowering your team what's the heuristics they should use to make decisions? Yeah,
look, I think IT has these nasty characteristics that, when you get a request, is already too late. right? There are plenty of things you need to anticipate well in advance so that you are ready when the request arrives. And then there will be a requested plug into this. I know it sounds exoteric, but take COVID. So we had 2 years of pandemics, and in the bank, in the space of few days, we sent home 80,000 people and they're working remote, and the VPN was holding. And people were surprised, saying, you are a magician. In 5 days, you set up a VPN infrastructure for 80,000 people. It took us 2 years, right? It is just that IT started preparing for an architectural evolution that was necessary way before, and when it was asked, it was ready, right? So one element of this decision making is you need to have a very strong architecture function that has control on what is happening in terms of long-term technology choices. Another example, we rolled out at UniCredit a single Devops stack, very powerful, created by the architects together with the core software developers, and operated, by the way, by the architecture team, right? Because it it facilitates the level of control, but it has to be created in advance. And of course, when you have the new chief exec comes in and wants to have a new consumer lending platform, thrown out in 3 months under Agile and God knows what, if you are ready with a DevOps stack and if your cloud pillars are ready for prime time, then you can make it. Otherwise, if you have to start redesigning from scratch, it doesn't work. And here is exactly the challenge, because how do you keep focus for a sufficiently long time on invisible projects? Because the VPN example or the DevOps stack example, these are invisible projects for a very long time before they emerge and they are ready for general availability, if you want to call it like this, and then you can start using it. And that game is a very tricky one, because in the meantime, you have everybody that wants to go fast and wants to cut corners, and this challenge between the long-term horizon and the short-term immediacy of what business needs is the place where you also have to do compromises. Sometimes you have to accept dirty solutions because your long-term plan is not there yet, and the solution has to happen. But if you neglect the long-term plan and the long-term strategic implementations, you end up having only dirty solutions, and then it's a nightmare.
That's a great perspective. I mean, it underlines, I think, that, well, firstly, the complexity of the decision-making process, but secondly, that there's no one size fits all, but you need to be fully engaged with the organization in order to ever have a chance of navigating the decision-making process. And actually being front-footed about understanding it is critical. Yeah, that's fantastic. We've had some questions coming in from the audience, and if anyone has any others, please jump in and add them. So maybe we'll switch gears to those, Daniele. I've got the first one from Manmit Shrimali. He says, and it's a great question. So we're seeing less experienced CIOs by default opt for a build in-house or to go for a larger Google or an IBM to reduce risk. How do you message for a startup or a scale-up, or build the case around a build versus buy, or build versus buy versus built to transfer?
Yeah, okay. I think there is no unique solution. It's not that doing in-house is bad by default, or consuming SaaS is bad by default. I mean, it depends from case to case. The build in-house is less a question of the experience, I believe, because I've seen it happening in very different places. It's a question of the skills you have, because if you have an IT organization with 200 Java coders, probably you are going to end up developing a lot of Java because the resource is there, and it's not good or bad. It is just a fact of life. It depends on the availability of things in the market. Don't forget that 15 years ago or 20 years ago, there were still companies developing their own middlewares. There are still very large financial institutions, I know at least of one, that develops their own firewalls, because they say, if I buy a commercial firewall, the bad guys will also have it in their labs, and they will be able to reverse engineer it. So I'll build my own. So that is a choice that varies from situation to situation. Now, the tricky part, I understand if you're a SaaS provider, it's tricky to enter that space. It's an effect of vicious circle, right? Because when you start developing in-house, you become always more and more custom made, and that makes integration of new things from the outside more and more complicated. So that's where the vicious circle start getting kicking in. The comment I made before, if you substitute existing technology, then you can simplify that part of the cost of an in-house development. The downside is that if you have been developing in-house for 10 years a function, it will have been so customized and so creatively built that there is no path to migration except business accept to cut massively the business that is supported by this. So to answer your question, the business case around the buy build or buy build to transfer and all the models in between, it's a case which is not simply an IT case. It's a case for business first. Business, where are you differentiating yourself in the market? Is it really in accounting? Right? And if it's not in accounting, probably your accounting system has not to be developed in-house because it's a freaky accounting system or CRM or God knows. Then there might be features that are so sophisticated where you have your own knowledge and IP that you want to keep in-house, right? And that is the level of conversation that you can bring in. There is no simple way. I would also ensure that you get links to the people in the organization that work again on architecture, because the real big evolution which is happening today is to create, even across legacy system landscapes and modern architecture, say a model of integration that creates modules and allows an encapsulation of functions. I'm not talking microservice API and everything else, but creates a governance model, a technical model around that allows you to adopt standard solution from the market, a SaaS CRM or an HR platform or a component of, and integrate in a smooth way what is inside. Of course, if your prospect has something developed in-house, you can't make it just on a business case story, right? You need to make it on a story of standardization. You need to make it on a case of you maintain the piece of software for them if they accept to standardize. You can make it a story on they can integrate in a different way. You can make a story that the testing that you apply to your system is completely different, that your cybersecurity posture on that piece of functionality is way better. So there are, and this is what I was mentioning before with value, that you can still touch and find attention at least.
It's interesting what you say, that actually the build in-house is by no means the silver. It's not the control that people perhaps think they have, because actually they're increasing the technical debt, and maybe later on down the road, the challenges for integration or the challenges to replace become that much greater. We've got another question from Andre Rodero, and I think this is one from a complexity perspective that I know you have some strong thoughts on, which is, how do you think about the governance of no/low code technologies? How do you think about controlling that zoo?
Yeah, look, on that specific one, I don't have a final answer yet, because first of all, if I want to be brutal, the no-code, low-code technologies have been there since the introduction of Excel. Okay, Excel is the ultimate no-code, low-code platform, together with the more dangerous sibling Access that have been there for a long time. Now, jokes aside, all solutions that give freedom to the users, ideally to sophisticated users, also super users, or call them whatever you want, need to go hand in hand with a level of control that ensures that what is happening there remains in the boundaries, in risk terms for the organization that you can accept. I would not try to solve it with governance, because governance is to me, resonates with manual process, resonates with approvals, resonates with asking somebody for permission, resonates with something which has very, very low agility. And by the way, again, every new family of technologies you roll out, like no-code, low-code, or like RPA before, or even the API, I would say paradigm, and I'm not even talking SOA and everything else beyond, is an additional layer of complexity, right? So how do I orchestrate all of this? And I mentioned DevOps before. To me, DevOps is one of the instruments to manage exactly that democratization of functionalities, because the idea that we built around the DevOps stack was, look, you are a coder, you can code whatever you want. You are a no-coder, you can no-code whatever you want. But the moment you commit what you have no-coded or coded, and you want to make it live, so it has to be in production, it's an engine that takes that artifact and brings it for you in production. And through that process, validates, checks, applies security controls in an automated way, of course, So there is nobody looking at that in a human way, because that way I can let you play and toy whatever you have, but I have a control on what is happening in production. Because again, the point is not I need to limit you user with your low code, no code, or with your models or with your Excel or whatever. The only thing I need to check is that what is in production, i.e. it starts becoming a formal act in front of the law, in front of the regulator, in front of the customer. What gets there is verified. So I will not let, things toying around and then hitting production. That's not acceptable. So the short answer to this, it has to go through an automated release process that ensures that my controls are applied. Then I can let anarchy happen.
And with that process, that would maintain the agility that one hopes for with low code, no code.
Ideally, yes. Ideally, yes. There is still one thing that remains a bit. If you look at the macro history of IT, right? So we had mainframes, right? And then in the 80s, there were client server architectures popping out. And the argument was mainframe is old, ugly, expensive, the screen is only green and blah. We have client server, agility, speed, self-service. You can, you break free from the mainframe. We ended up having servers under every single desk in all companies and data center all over the place, so sprawl of machines like there is no tomorrow. Then virtualization came, and then we cleaned up all the mess into data centers. Side note, racks with VMs inside are mainframes again, but that's a side note now. Now cloud is coming, and with cloud, low code, no code, all the paradigms. And we know what is going to happen. There will be a sort of, finally we are free from the boundaries and from the controls of IT, so everybody can. And if we don't do it in an intelligent way, we will end up exactly where we were before virtualization, which is at zoo all over the place, where I don't know who has no-coded what. Are there orphanly no-code chunks that are still doing things, even if the person has retired since 5 years? How do I manage that emerging complexity, right? And that's why, to me, the governance here is less how do I make it happen, but is how do I make it happen in a way where I keep complexity under control. And the message for the portfolio companies to me is a crucial one. When you propose your technologies, don't only think to the feature you are providing to your prospect or to your customer, to your counterpart. Tell them also a story on how they are going to manage the emerging complexity. Because if you don't give them a message in this sense, the only thing they will see is, oh gosh, I have another 10 years of this, or in 5 years down the road, I have another 10 years of disaster because I will not know what I have in my information landscape. So this is, to me, the crucial element. So how to govern, but also is how to avoid that complexity to explode. And you have to design it into your products. If you don't, and if you enter a sort of, I would say, hyper creativity mode where everyone can design whatever they want, it's going to get very bloody very quickly.
That's a great point. Another question we've got from Stephen Goodman, who asks about the shift from IT buyers and budget holders to OT buyers and budget holders. And how do you think about approaching a world in which the OT buyers and budget holders have an enormous amount of latitude to buy point solutions, and how much do you want to control of that world or have to understand it?
Yeah, look, the point is, if you see that evolution in the true TCO sense, so not just get the cash to buy a technology, but get the resource to buy and operate the technology, then it can function, right? What I've seen is that the resource allocation mechanism has been asked very vehemently from business to be in their hands, but on the project side, while the run side was, it's a cost of doing business. That doesn't work because, buying software is only a small chunk of the total cost of having that software and ideally using it, right? So that if the model of this decentralization of decision making is properly end-to-end in the true sense of the word, it can work because it creates an operating model where you delegate and empower the consumer of an application in their behavior. Otherwise, they will just spend money that they have, like my kids when they go to the shop and buy candies, but then the cost of the dentist is on my books, right? So and here you need to manage a little bit the storyline to them.
That's, yeah, I think that's yeah, that's that is a very good point. In a similar vein of how there's sort of a cross set of challenges, Ori Yankelev's asked, information security, which I think you mentioned a couple of times, is obviously the top priority for the CISO. How high does it land in your list of priorities, or do you say my CISO's over there and he's got it handled?
Look, I mean, you can't delegate to the CISO. The CISO is a second level control, right? If my developers can't develop secure software, I can have the best CISO in the world, I will have a problem, right? And the point is not it's the CISO problem because it's security, it's the company problem, right? And to me, it's a question also of professional ethos. If you are a CIO, if you are heading an IT, you have to master also security of your code, right? So I couldn't imagine a car producer that does not have any pride in ensuring that the steering wheel works as expected or the brakes, right? What's the point, right? So yes, it's definitely my responsibility to ensure that my code is secure. The CISO helps me enabling it, first of all, by giving me architectures that security things are appropriate, providing services, identity access management I want to consume from the security team, right? Or ensuring that I have a SOC that is observing what is happening in my universe. But at the end of the day, if the software that has been developed is stupid, it's my fault.
That is a great point. I think we've got time for one final question before we wrap up, and yep. It's perhaps an opportunity to look into your CIO crystal ball a little bit, which is, obviously you've witnessed an awful lot of change over the last years as you've risen to the very, very top. How do you see the CIO's role changing, going forward?
It varies. I think that CIOs that can seed wisely, that can anticipate very, very early on, that can create a culture that attracts talent, that can they can align the work of their talent towards a common purpose and not let anarchy, I would say, emerge, that will create a culture of how and not a culture of no, are the ones that are going to make a difference going forward, right? So the CIO as the chief bureaucracy officer is a dead species. The CIO as and you will excuse me the word, as the chief bullshit officer is a dead species too. If you go read on the press some of the big announcements, I'm moving the whole bank XYZ onto whatever super technology, this is marketing, right? And these CIOs might survive for a while, they might jump from one role to the next one, but they will not really make a difference. And you want, you portfolio companies, listener, you want to be associated with CIOs that are known for execution and not for storytelling.
Fantastic. An amazing message. Being a culture of how rather than a culture of no, and being alongside those CIOs, great change. Daniele, I want to thank you hugely on behalf not only of all the folk who are on the phone here, but all the 40 companies that you met over the last weeks and months. It's been a privilege having you, and I want to just thank you so much for all the wisdom that you've shared with us today. Before we leave, I want to just give a very quick plug to the fact that while we're sad to be saying au revoir to Daniele, we have a CTO in residence, Mahmoud Al-Assir, who's come on board and will be with us for the next 5 weeks. So for those in the portfolio, an opportunity to connect with a different persona in the IT firmament, and one I know Daniele a little bit. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, in that case, all that's left to say is I'm going to hand back to Gabriele, but thank you all ever so much for joining, and Daniele, thanks once again.
Thank you, everybody.
So sorry. All right, everyone. That was an awesome event. Thank you both to Daniel and Daniele. That was so interesting. I'm not sure about you guys, but I definitely learned a lot. Just to close up on some housekeeping items, some of the upcoming events we have with Insight, we would like to invite you to a variety of our in-person and virtual events that aim to educate and connect you with fellow portfolio companies in our network. Our biggest upcoming one is Scale Up AI, taking place on April 6th and 7th. Please feel free to sign up and register. In our post-event email, we will create a link for you so you can register there if you're free. We have some outstanding speakers and we don't want you to miss it. Thanks again for such a great event, guys, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay in touch.